This story follows a classic transmigration plot, the kind where a game developer suddenly finds himself reincarnated as the villain of the very game he created with his own hands. But before diving into the madness, let's rewind a bit and get some background on both the game and the poor bastard whose fate is about to take a very twisted turn. It's the middle of the night, and Woojin is finally wrapping up a bug that's been haunting him for weeks. He just finished fine-tuning the game route of a side character, Deculein von Grahan-Yukline. Now, Deculein isn't just any NPC. He's an intermediate boss, a named villain. And of course, Woojin had to make sure that no matter which path the player took, Deculein's death was absolutely inevitable. After grinding his ass off to get everything perfect, he's about ready to call it a night when his ex walks in. Now, here's the fun part. Not only is she his ex, but she also happens to be the team leader of the development team. Their relationship had its moments, but over time, things fell apart. Woojin was a lazy-ass procrastinator, while she was a workaholic who lived and breathed ambition. Sure, she did push him to be a better person, but in the end, it wasn't enough. 6 months later, he found out she had moved on. Anyway, she casually strolls in, takes one look at Deculein on the screen, and drops an absolute bomb. Turns out, Deculein's character design was based on Woojin himself. His traits, his skills, even his god-awful personality, everything matched him to a T. Before he can even process that piece of information, she notices her new boyfriend waiting outside and leaves without another word. Now, it's almost 2 a.m., and Woojin is still obsessively testing Deculein, making sure every little detail is perfect. But he doesn't like this whole Deculein is supposed to be him thing. Because, let's be honest, Deculein is a total bastard, a so-called magical genius from childhood, put on a pedestal for his potential, but in reality, just another mediocre, noble drowning in arrogance. His personality is so damn twisted that calling him human would be generous. In the game, he's supposed to get stronger over time, but no matter what, he remains the one character everyone loves to hate. Feeling a little mischievous, Woojin decides to tweak Deculein's personality a bit, add something unique, something special, just for him. Since this villain is practically his in-game doppelganger, he throws in a new attribute, comprehension. And because he's already in the mood, he sneaks in a few of his personal favorites: wealth, Midas touch, sharp eyesight, and iron will. But after stuffing Deculein with all these overpowered perks, it hits him. Maybe he went a little overboard. He quickly moves to revert everything back to normal, because the last thing he needs is another game-breaking bug right before launch. And that's when he gets a text. The message tells him to look outside. Confused, Woojin glances out the window, only to see a massive hole in the sky. The next thing he knows, a lightning bolt comes crashing down toward him, and before he can even curse, everything turns black. When he opens his eyes, he's no longer Woojin. It's been a few days since he woke up inside the game, inside the body of Deculein, the very man doomed to die, no matter what. As he's still grappling with this absolute nightmare, Deculein's sister suddenly barges into his room. Annoyed as hell, she scolds him for slacking off instead of handling his duties as a distinguished professor. Apparently, he's been sulking over a woman instead of doing his damn job. After dumping a pile of documents on his desk, she storms out, but not before warning him to get his act together, because she won't stand for him dragging the family name through the mud. At first, Woojin thought this was just some messed up dream. But as the days passed, the overwhelming realism of it all forced him to accept the truth. He still doesn't know if this is some kind of afterlife, considering, well, he did get obliterated by a lightning strike. But one thing is clear. He's now literally the villain of the game he once developed. And if anyone needs a reminder, let's spell it out. Deculein is a mid-tier boss. No matter which route the player takes, he is the root of all problems, the ultimate enemy of everyone, and the reason countless characters suffer. And now, Woojin is him. Woojin had a lot on his mind, but one thing bothered him more than anything. He had no clue which part of the story he was currently in. The only thing he knew for sure was how much mana he had, but even that wasn't much help since he had no idea how fast it would run out. He wasn't exaggerating when he said that, during development, he and the others had tested this game at least 1,000 times. And out of all those runs, this particular character, Deculein, had survived exactly once. Because that's all Deculein was designed for. A middle boss. A glorified stepping stone meant to die. Woojin's gaze drifted toward the documents that Deculein's half-sister had practically thrown at him before storming out. Deculein von Grahan-Yukline, the current head of House Yukline, a position Deculein himself should have held, if not for, well, whatever mess his past self had gotten into. And, as if things weren't complicated enough, it seemed Deculein and Uriel didn't share the usual warm sibling bond. Fantastic. On top of that, Deculein apparently had a fiancée, Julie. Given how Uriel spat out her name with such disdain, Woojin could already tell something nasty had gone down between them. He flipped through the documents and found something even better, a contract. Turns out, he was already signed up as Professor Deculein at the Imperial University, responsible for teaching basic magic and mana control. And just like that, his fate was sealed. It didn't matter that he had zero teaching experience. Skipping out wasn't an option. At the very least, it gave him an excuse to step outside and gather intel on his current situation. Before he could process everything, a system notification blinked in front of him, listing his primary survival goal, become necessary to the game. His first side quest, deliver a lecture at the university. If completed, he'd earn 0.5 store currency. Not much, but crucial for survival. He also recalled certain routes where Deculein ended up dead thanks to Uriel's actions. Yeah, avoiding that sounded like a good plan. With a sigh, he got up, ready to tackle this new mission. The only problem? He had no idea what he was supposed to lecture about. But then again, that wasn't an issue. He had the comprehension skill, the one attribute he had added before being unceremoniously dropped into this world. As long as he had a bit of mana, he could understand literally anything. As he changed into something more formal, he couldn't help but notice how different this place was from his old life. Yet, despite never having lived as Deculein before, everything felt disturbingly natural. The tailored clothes, the aristocratic air. It should have been suffocating, but instead, they brought an odd sense of comfort. It was all thanks to Deculein's built-in attributes, intimidation, dignity, and aesthetic sense. It was as if Deculein himself was helping him settle into this body. Woojin didn't even feel the urge to act out of character. The rigid formality he once found exhausting now felt effortless. But despite knowing this was all just part of the role, there was something unsettling about it. As he walked toward his first lecture, everything felt disturbingly normal, like he belonged here. Like he was meant to be one of the noble elite, standing above the common masses. A far cry from Kim Woojin, the nobody from South Korea. That guy? He was just an average-looking slacker, dumped by his ex and going nowhere in life. But now, as Deculein, he wanted to embrace this role fully. If he was stuck here, he might as well play the part of a proper aristocrat. He stepped into his car. Just the interior alone screamed luxury, a stark contrast to anything he had ever experienced before. Speaking of nice cars, the thought reminded him of his ex's boyfriend, the rich bastard who loved flexing his ride. But before his mind could wander too far, he noticed someone sitting in the adjacent seat. A young boy who, upon realizing Deculein was there, immediately straightened up and greeted him nervously before handing over a stack of documents. Woojin entertained the possibility that this kid might be his assistant or secretary. When he asked for confirmation, the boy looked completely caught off guard, as if Deculein had just said something absurd. Apparently, this kid had been working under Deculein for 3 years. Woojin sighed and flipped through the documents, half expecting to find detailed lecture material. Instead, what he got was essentially a script, a word-for-word breakdown of what he was supposed to say. Every single detail. Yeah, this checked out. There was no way in hell someone like Deculein would have actually prepared his own teaching material. The prideful bastard was too arrogant and too untalented for that. Realizing just how much effort this kid must have put into it, Woojin felt compelled to say something. A simple word of appreciation wouldn't kill him, right? So he did just that. The reaction was unexpected. The boy practically froze in shock, eyes wide like he had just seen a ghost. Even the driver stiffened, as if the world had just flipped upside down. Apparently, Deculein saying something nice was unheard of. And then Woojin felt it. A sharp, sickening sensation hit him like a punch to the gut. It was as if his entire body rejected the act of kindness outright. The sheer absurdity of it made him pause. Was this body actually punishing him for complimenting someone? What kind of absolute bastard was Deculein? Thinking back, he had felt this same nauseating sensation when he left the manor earlier. It was almost like Deculein's consciousness was clawing at him, trying to take back control. After a short journey, they finally arrived at the Imperial University, a place teeming with life and buzzing with eager students. Now that he was here, his next task was simple. find the designated lecture hall mentioned in the documents. Rodeo Hall. As soon as he reached the hall, it was clear that the students were already settled in, their eyes filled with anticipation. Strangely enough, they actually seemed excited for this lecture. Rumors had spread that Professor Deculein was a master of spell interpretation, a talent that had once earned him the title of child prodigy at an early age. And then, the moment arrived. Deculein finally made his entrance, commanding the room's attention with nothing but his presence. He introduced himself in a steady, authoritative voice. Deculein von Grahan-Yukline, head professor of the university's magic tower. With the formalities out of the way, the lecture began. As expected, the female students were absolutely smitten by him. With his sharp features, regal aura, and the sheer confidence he exuded, it was no surprise that they hung onto his every word. But among them sat one student who held none of the admiration the others did. To her, Deculein wasn't a brilliant professor or a noble mage. He was nothing but a filthy thief. The man responsible for her father's downfall. Almost 3 years ago, her father, a dedicated scholar in spell interpretation, had taken his own life. He had poured years into his research, only for his thesis to be stolen from him. Broken and lost, he fell into despair, and ultimately, death became his only escape. The one who had taken everything from him, the so-called genius of spell interpretation, was none other than Deculein. With her father gone, she lost everything. Their home, their land, everything that once belonged to her family was stripped away, leaving her with nothing. But she refused to let it end there. She had made a vow to take revenge, to tear down the man who had stolen her father's life's work. To do that, she fought her way into the Empire's Royal University, where Deculein now stood as a professor. While the other students remained blissfully unaware of the truth, she was determined to expose him. She would prove that his so-called achievements were nothing but a stolen bluff. But taking him down wouldn't be easy. She had to be smart, meticulous. And so, for now, she waited. Meanwhile, Deculein continued his lecture, his voice steady and unwavering as he introduced the fundamentals of magic. He explained the 3 major attributes and 9 types of magic. Attributes were the very source of magic, while elements formed the materials that made up all things. The 9 types included summoning, destruction, support, enchantment, manipulation, ductility, bewitchment, and harmony. As he spoke, something unexpected happened. Woojin, the man now inhabiting Deculein's body, realized that this whole teaching thing was far easier than he'd expected. It was his first time standing in front of class, and he wasn't even familiar with the theory of magic. Yet, even though he was simply reading from a prepared script, everything made perfect sense to him. Not only that, but Deculein's natural authority made the students hang onto his every word. Even the usual elitist nonsense, things like maintaining strict eye contact and controlling the room's atmosphere, felt effortless like second nature. Maybe, just maybe, this version of Deculein truly had the makings of a great teacher. The lecture continued, delving deeper into the nature of mana. The way mana functioned depended on where it was stored in the body. Mages typically stored it in their heads, as it made spell casting easier. Knights, on the other hand, stored mana in their hearts, allowing them to channel it through their blood vessels. Then there was the inner core, a method that combined both internal and external mana, making it the most universally effective storage system. In short, talent mattered, but hard work was just as crucial. If someone lacked natural ability, their only choice was to pick a path and focus everything on it. Ironically, Woojin couldn't help but reflect on how unimpressive Deculein's own mana capacity actually was. His current reserve sat at around 3,500. To put that into perspective, there were mages out there whose primary mana pools exceeded 30,000. It was almost laughable that he was the one lecturing students on magic when, by all logic, he should be the one taking notes. With that, the lecture finally drew to a close. But there was one last line in the script he hesitated to say. He was certain that if this were the old Deculein, he would have completely ignored it. The line read, "If there are any students who have questions, feel free to ask." For a moment, silence filled the room. The students seemed completely absorbed in the lecture, leaving no room for doubts or confusion. Even Deculein himself felt relieved. No questions meant no unnecessary trouble. But just as he let his guard down, a lone student stood up. Her, the one who despised him more than anything. She had something on her mind. Last night, an unusual spell had been discovered in the dormitories, something suspected to be the work of the devil itself. But before answering her question, Deculeon's cold gaze locked onto her. He pointed out her lack of basic etiquette. She hadn't even introduced herself before speaking. If she couldn't follow simple classroom manners, then he saw no reason to acknowledge her question. Without another word, he turned to leave. It wasn't about etiquette. He simply didn't have the energy to deal with this right now. His comprehension skills alone consumed an absurd amount of mana, and at this moment, he was running on fumes. Out of the 3,375 mana he originally had, only 2,000 remained. Just understanding the lecture script had drained 1,300 mana from him. And now, she expected him to analyze a spell he had never seen before? Yeah, not happening. Meanwhile, the students snickered under their breath, thoroughly entertained by the spectacle before them. Watching her make a fool of herself, they assumed she had been trying to gain the professor's attention, only for it to backfire spectacularly. The poor girl, stung by the humiliation caused by Professor Deculeon's sharp words, struggled to maintain her composure. Even so, she refused to back down, still holding on to the hope that he would give her a proper response. According to her, the magic tower was refusing to investigate the matter, brushing it off as nothing more than a baseless rumor. But if it was Professor Deculeon, she was sure he could figure out what kind of magic was used. Taking matters into her own hands, she cast a spell right then and there, requesting Deculeon to interpret it. With no choice but to respond, Deculeon examined the spell, and in an instant, it drained around 1,700 mana. She revealed that several debutantes of the dormitory had been analyzing the same spell, yet despite their efforts, they had found absolutely no leads. This was why she had turned to him, hoping that, at the very least, he would take a glance at it. Without the slightest hesitation, Deculeon coldly declared that it was barrier magic. His sudden and unwavering response caught her completely off guard. He continued, elaborating that it was a bewitchment-type barrier spell, meaning that whoever cast it had the clear intention of trapping everyone inside the dormitory. With her question answered, Deculeon wasted no time in dismissing her, telling her not to persist any further since the matter had already been resolved. As if rubbing salt in the wound, he calmly collected the reward currency he had been promised before moving on, leaving her standing there, humiliated. The scene then shifted to the university's magic tower cafeteria, where that same girl was now stuffing her face without the slightest regard for table manners. Her name was Ephraim, and the only reason she had questioned Deculeon in the first place was to expose his so-called spell interpretation skills as a complete fraud. Yet, instead of proving him wrong, she had made a clown of herself, and the embarrassment was crushing. Even now, she refused to believe that Deculeon had actually known what he was talking about. In her mind, he had simply said the first thing that popped into his head. Bewitchment magic was extremely difficult, after all. Most spells required specific parameters, yet Deculeon had carelessly labeled it as bewitchment magic without mentioning a single parameter. That alone was enough for her to call bullshit. What she had shown him wasn't just some random spell. It was an exact replica of the unknown magic circle that had been drawn on the dormitory's front door the previous night. At first, everyone had been shocked by the sight of the unfamiliar spell, but it had quickly turned into research material for the new students. From the very beginning, she had been convinced that Deculeon was full of it, making up nonsense just to sound impressive. But then, one of her friends came rushing toward her, breathless with excitement. The magic circle on the dorm's front door had finally been deciphered, and, just as Deculeon had claimed, it really was a barrier spell. After collective research, they had reached the same conclusion, meaning Deculeon had been right all along. Ephraim sat frozen in absolute disbelief. There was no way. She refused to accept that it had actually been barrier magic. More than that, she couldn't stand the thought of acknowledging Deculeon as a legitimate master of spell interpretation. Meanwhile, her friend, still caught up in admiration, rattled off endless praises for Professor Deculeon, going on and on about his incredible capabilities. Eventually, after singing his praises long enough, her friend decided to leave, but not before thanking Ephraim for having the guts to question the professor in the first place, since no one else would have dared. Even so, Ephraim remained unconvinced. There was no way Deculeon had actually given the correct answer on purpose. It had to have been a damn fluke. What pissed her off even more was the fact that, instead of exposing him as a fraud, she had only made him look even more competent. Now, everyone was convinced that Deculeon was a capable professor. Frustrated, she began flipping through a document detailing Deculeon's achievements, determined to learn more about her so-called enemy. After all, there was an old saying, if you know the enemy in yourself, you will never be defeated. If she had to deal with that jackass every single day, then fine. She would make sure to expose him so thoroughly that his reputation would be ruined beyond repair. The scene shifts to Deculein, still dreading the worst possible outcome of what had happened in the classroom. The moment his eyes landed on that spell, his comprehension skill had activated automatically. Just a single glance at the spell circle, with its tangled lines and intricate structure, had been enough to drain every last bit of mana he had left. But what frustrated him the most was that, even after sacrificing all that mana, he still couldn't grasp what the spell actually was. Even if he had twice the amount of mana he possessed now, it wouldn't have made a difference. The principles behind it remained completely out of reach. For now, though, he was just relieved that everything had worked out in his favor. But just as he continued walking, his path was suddenly blocked by a woman clad in gleaming white knight armor. White hair, light-colored eyes, she was a familiar sight. Deculein recognized her instantly, not just because he had seen her countless times in this world, but because he had worked on this game himself. She was Woojin von Grahan-Yukline, his supposed fiancée and a named character destined to become the pinnacle of knighthood. He hadn't expected to cross paths with her this early, but there was no avoiding it now. Without hesitation, he responded to her greeting, casually claiming that he was doing fine. But Julie wasn't convinced. Her expression hardened as she questioned how he could possibly be fine after breaking the promise they had made a week ago. Of course, Woojin, now Deculein, had absolutely no clue what she was talking about. And since he had no intention of getting caught up in unnecessary drama this early, he decided to brush it off. With a composed demeanor, he attempted to walk past her, dismissing the supposed promise by saying he didn't recall making any such agreement. Julie, however, wasn't having it. She immediately stepped in front of him again, blocking his path. She wasn't going to let him run away like last time. Seeing the sheer determination in her stance, Deculein realized she wouldn't let him go without an answer. He tried again, repeating his claim that he had forgotten, this time using his recent fever as an excuse. He even asked her to remind him exactly what promise she was talking about. At that moment, the story flashed back to 1 week ago. Julie had made a vow to him. If he was truthful to himself, if he dropped his pretenses and arrogance and admitted his faults to everyone, then she would stand by his side no matter what, even if the world crumbled. Back in the present, Julie was on the verge of tears. Doubt flickered in her eyes as she wondered if she had placed her trust in the wrong person. With a sulking expression, she finally stepped aside, allowing him to leave. Deculein, however, didn't even spare her a second glance. He didn't ask what was wrong, didn't acknowledge her pain. He simply walked away. And that, of course, annoyed the hell out of Julie, though she kept her frustration to herself. Their engagement had never been about love. It was a union of convenience, carefully arranged to benefit both families. Deculein, a talented mage, and Julie, a prodigious knight. Their marriage was meant to strengthen the influence of their noble bloodlines. The Yuklines and the Friedens, two powerful families standing together. No one had objected to it because, on paper, it was the perfect match. But reality was a different story. As time passed, it became clear that Deculein's so-called talent had never truly existed. He was not the prodigy the world had believed him to be. Perhaps he refused to acknowledge it himself, but the truth was undeniable. He had deceived everyone, branding himself as a genius in spell analysis and even managing to secure a position as a professor. But that illusion eventually crumbled. Headlines had spread like wildfire, claiming that the youngest top professor of the Magic Tower was on a steady decline. After that, Deculein had stopped making any notable achievements. Even so, the Yuklines and the Friedens had done everything in their power to keep the scandal quiet. Julie was certain that neither household wanted to become the subject of gossip. They had no intention of letting their family's shame become public knowledge. But Julie couldn't just accept it. She had agreed to this marriage despite lacking any love for Deculein, but she refused to tolerate lies. They clashed with everything she stood for as a knight. What stung the most, however, was that Deculein himself had promised to uphold her beliefs. He had agreed to remain a truthful person, and yet, now it seemed to her that it had all been just another load of bullshit. Before moving forward, let's take a moment to understand the significance of the Imperial University and the Magic Tower. The Imperial University is the most prestigious institution in the game, and among its various departments, the Magic Department reigns supreme. To put it into perspective, The magic department is like the Korean University Medical School, while the Magic Tower is comparable to the Korean National University Hospital, a place of cutting-edge research and top-tier professionals. Woojin takes in the grandeur of the place, his eyes scanning the vast, meticulously maintained campus. The garden, with its neatly trimmed hedges and elegant pathways, resembles something straight out of an American college campus. Every detail here was carefully designed, and he knows firsthand how much effort went into crafting this atmosphere. After all, he and his team had spent countless nights bringing this world to life. Yet, as much as he'd love to immerse himself in the beauty of it all, there's one lingering regret. He wishes he were in someone else's body. Just as this thought crosses his mind, he senses something off. Someone is following him. The moment he turns around to confront them, he collides headfirst into the person trailing him. Papers fly everywhere, scattering like autumn leaves in the wind. The unfortunate victim of this crash is none other than his assistant, Alan, who is rushing with a massive stack of documents. For a brief second, Deculean's instincts scream at him, making him think it might be an ambush, but as soon as he recognizes Alan, that tension fades. Later, back in his office, Alan finally presents the documents he had been hurrying to deliver. It's a sponsorship list for the new mages this year. Much like real-world research institutions, the Magic Tower relies on funding for magical development, and the professors here sponsor promising new mages they deem worthy. As Deculean flips through the profiles, one name immediately catches his attention. Unlike the others, this one gleams in a radiant golden light, a detail he quickly attributes to his unique ability. The reason for this becomes obvious. Deculean possesses an attribute called Wealthy Magnate, which grants him an uncanny intuition for profitable ventures. The more information he receives, the sharper his business instincts become. Then there's sharp eyesight, another ability that allows him to visually perceive attributes, mana levels, and other key details. The combination of these two traits makes it painfully clear. Any name shining in this golden glow is a walking fortune just waiting to be claimed. And among all the names on the list, one stands out the most. Ephraim Luna. The realization hits like a slap to the face. Of all people, the one his abilities mark as the most promising candidate for prosperity is the very girl who is actively working to destroy him. The irony is almost laughable. Deculean knows her well. She's one of the main characters in the game. According to the developers, she harbors a deep grudge against him, and for good reason. Her father lost his life because of him. As he continues reading, something else catches his attention. Unlike others on the list, Ephraim has no sponsors. When he questions Alan about it, the answer is hardly surprising. Everyone is being cautious. No one wants to risk angering Deculean by supporting someone who might become his enemy. And yet, there's something about her that commands respect. Despite never attending the academy and learning magic entirely through self-study, her talent is undeniable. Her potential is limitless. But it doesn't change the fact that she sees him as an enemy. Or rather, he is her enemy. After all, he's the reason her father is dead. Woojin already knows how this story is supposed to go. If events follow their original path, he'll die, just as he does in the game. It's inevitable. His fate is to be killed, whether by sword, poison, assassination, or a well-timed explosion. The method may change, but the result remains the same. That's thanks to another one of his wonderful attributes, Villain's Fate, an ability that ensures the entire world despises him and wants him dead. The only upside? Anything that fails to kill him only makes him stronger. But he isn't interested in dying. Not in this world, not in this body. If he wants to survive, he needs to make choices that the original Deculean never would. Starting with this one. Without hesitation, he signs the sponsorship papers for Ephraim Luna. Handing the documents back to Alan, he instructs him to submit them immediately. He also lists a few books he needs borrowed, resources that will help him shape his next steps. Left alone in his office, Deculean leans back, lost in thought. If there's one thing he knows for sure, it's that money will be his greatest shield. Many of the deaths awaiting him can be avoided with enough wealth. Sponsoring a promising mage is a step in the right direction, but it won't be enough. There are countless enemies lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. If he wants to live, there's only one way out. He needs to amass enough wealth and power to crush anyone who stands in his way. As Woojin fixated on his goal of becoming stronger, he couldn't help but recall that Deculean's talents were, at best, average. If he didn't find a way to improve, He was certain he wouldn't survive the countless threats looming over him. Fortunately, there was one thing working in his favor: his attributes. Despite boasting about controlling all four elements, the truth was that Deculeon's potential lay specifically in earth and fire. When these two were combined with metal, they resulted in something unique: his attribute, Midas Touch. This ability consumed his mana to unlock the hidden potential of a target. His proficiency in metal manipulation also allowed him to wield levitating blades, though in reality, these so-called chain-control blades were nothing more than refined telekinesis. However, in this world, telekinesis was an enigma, barely understood and rarely practiced. Deculeon knew that if he could master basic manipulation magic, he could compensate for his lack of overwhelming raw power by controlling metal objects at will. But for that, he needed to start with the fundamentals. Without wasting time, he activated his comprehension skill, instantly absorbing all concepts and spells related to basic telekinesis from the book in front of him. Moments later, armed with this new knowledge, he focused on a nearby pen. A faint energy coursed through his body, and in an instant, the pen floated into the air. His Midas Touch attribute allowed him to cast telekinesis effortlessly, without any incantation. Though what he had just learned was merely the foundation, he could already sense its potential. The thought of mastering advanced telekinesis excited him. There was no telling what he would be capable of once he reached that stage. The next challenge was even more ambitious: integrating a magic circle into his body. In this world, magic circles grew stronger the larger they were. Deculeon planned to push this concept to the extreme by engraving them all over his body. But first, he needed to understand his body on a deeper level. Using his comprehension skill, he focused not just on his brain, but on his heart, muscles, and even his inner core. Then, the engraving process began. The moment the magic circle started etching itself onto his body, a searing pain erupted, unlike anything he had ever experienced. It felt as if every bone was shattering, every muscle being ripped apart from the inside. But despite the agony, Deculeon didn't waver. Not a single groan escaped his lips. He endured it all with the grace expected of a noble. And yet, when the process finally ended, he was met with failure. His mana reserve was too low, barely at one point. The magic circle had only managed to engrave itself onto his shoulder, and at this rate, it would take 2 weeks to cover his entire body. Even so, he wasn't discouraged. This was only the beginning. A month passed after Deculeon's seminar, and the long-awaited first day of lectures at the university's magic tower had finally arrived. In a remote training area, students gathered in anticipation, eager for their first lesson. A notice board nearby carried a simple message from the professor. Before the actual lessons began, the students were expected to prove their abilities in an environment already rich with elemental energy. To everyone's surprise, the professor had simply left them to figure things out on their own. Murmurs of confusion spread through the crowd, but the one who was most annoyed by this situation was, without a doubt, Ephraim. Irritated, she muttered curses under her breath, questioning why the hell their professor would abandon them like this. Just as she was venting her frustration, a girl deliberately brushed past her, bumping into her shoulder. Already on edge, Ephraim turned sharply, ready to snap at whoever had the audacity to provoke her. But the moment she saw the girl's face, her anger twisted into pure shock. Standing before her was Sylvia von Josephine-Illade. For a moment, their eyes met, tension crackling in the air. But Sylvia, unfazed, simply walked past her as if she didn't even exist. As Ephraim focused on her task, her mind remained tangled in the encounter from earlier. She was certain the girl she had run into was from House Illade. A decade ago, the Illades, fearing Ephraim's potential, had surrounded her family's manor with troops, threatening them into submission. And yet, here was Sylvia, acting as if she had no idea who Ephraim was. It made no sense. Lost in thought, she didn't immediately notice the shift in the atmosphere. The magic structure she had been carefully constructing wavered, its form destabilizing. A crushing pressure filled the air, a suffocating force that made her skin crawl. It was as if her mana was being sucked away, drawn towards something unnatural. Snapping her gaze toward the disturbance, she spotted Sylvia. The blonde had just conjured a massive structure, one so enormous that it dwarfed Ephraim's creation by 1,000-fold. Ephraim's irritation flared instantly. The sheer turbulence caused by Sylvia's magic had completely obliterated her own work. Fury bubbled inside her, but Sylvia, as always, remained completely unfazed, continuing her task as if Ephraim didn't even exist. That, more than anything, set her blood on fire. The arrogance, the audacity. Determined to force a reaction, Ephraim decided to poke the bear. She began throwing sharp jabs at Sylvia, belittling her strength, anything to get under her skin. After all, they were rivals. Sylvia had spent years threatening her, trying to crush her spirit and force her to step away from magic, just so she could surpass her. And now she was pretending not to even recognize her. Sylvia, still infuriatingly indifferent, finally responded. She claimed not to remember Ephraim at all, but admitted she had heard of a certain impudent, negligent noble who had died. The moment those words left her mouth, the world around Ephraim blurred. Her father. That was a direct insult to her father. Her vision tinted red as rage exploded inside her. Without a second thought, she leaped into the air, magic surging around her clenched fist. Sylvia was going to regret opening her damn mouth. With a furious lunge, she swung a devastating strike straight at her rival. Sylvia barely had time to react. A protective barrier flared to life just in time, her eyes betraying a flicker of doubt in her own ability to withstand the attack. Then came the collision. An earth-shattering boom erupted as their forces clashed, sending violent gusts ripping through the students around them. The sheer impact made them stumble, groaning as the shockwave rattled through their bodies. As the dust settled, Ephraim stood victorious, her left hand gripping Sylvia's head, her voice roaring with fury. How dare she insult her father? The sheer audacity made her sick. But as her rage boiled over, something in the distance caught her eye. A strange, mystical dark light had begun to form at the exact spot where their mana had collided. And then the screaming started. The students panicked as the space around them distorted, warping unnaturally. Ephraim's breath hitched. A void. The collision had ruptured space itself, and now it was devouring everything in its path. The panic escalated as realization sank in. If that thing exploded, metal fragments would tear through them like shrapnel. It would be a massacre. Gritting her teeth, Ephraim threw everything she had into containing the magic, her body straining under the pressure. But then, silence. The crushing weight vanished in an instant. It was as if the void had simply stopped. Heart pounding, she forced her eyes open, only to see a towering figure standing before them. Clad in refined, noble attire, radiating an air of absolute authority, was their professor, Deculein. The mere sight of him was enough to freeze everyone in place. But what truly left them speechless was what he had just done. With effortless precision, Deculein had halted the fragments using ice magic in the blink of an eye. And as if that weren't enough, he then displayed a masterful use of telekinesis, controlling the ice shards with mesmerizing elegance. The scene was breathtaking, a reminder of the true beauty of magic. Even Ephraim, as skilled as she was, couldn't help but feel captivated by the sheer brilliance of it. With the crisis neutralized, Deculein finally spoke, his cold, commanding voice slicing through the stunned silence. His words marked the end of the lecture, but as his piercing gaze turned to Sylvia and Ephraim, the atmosphere shifted once again. Without needing to elaborate, his meaning was clear. Everyone else was dismissed, except for the two troublemakers responsible for this disaster. As the students hurried away, casting glances of pity at her, Ephraim could only stand there, her stomach sinking. Her face said it all. Oh shit, she was so screwed. As the scene shifts, the tension thickens inside the interrogation room. Deculein sat in silence, awaiting the arrival of the other professors, Retlon from the Spirit Studies Department and Reelin from the Support Studies Department. Seated beside him was none other than Adeline Sigillian, the chairwoman of the university. Once the professors settled in, their attention turned to the subject of today's meeting, the reckless student who had dared to strike down a noble from the Alade household. Ephraim, standing at the center of it all, was nothing more than a nameless nobody in their eyes. The kind of student the university wouldn't hesitate to discard. The way they sized her up, measuring her worth based on her lack of noble lineage, made it painfully clear how this meeting would unfold. Had it not been for Deculein's intervention, things could have escalated far worse. His actions had left the professors impressed, but he already knew how this disciplinary meeting would go. The daughter of an influential family would walk away as the victim, while the so-called fallen noble, Ephraim, a mere commoner, would be labeled the villain. It was a script already written, one Deculein had no intention of letting play out so easily. There was something about Ephraim that drew his attention from the very start. Scarlet energy leaking from her, as if she carried some kind of curse. To someone like him, someone who bore the fate of a villain, it was as clear as day. That energy was a sign of trouble, a mark that the world itself wanted her dead. And if he didn't do something to shift the outcome now, that same fate would only inch him closer to his own downfall. The official hearing began, with Reborn being the first to lash out. His voice was sharp as he reprimanded Ephraim for her reckless behavior, scolding her for endangering students and engaging in senseless conflict. If not for Deculein's interference, the situation could have spiraled out of control. Ephraim, dejected yet resolute, refused to speak of her reasons. Her silence came across as defiance, an outright insult to the professors presiding over the meeting. But in truth, all she cared about was keeping her true motives hidden, especially from the man she intended to bring down. Sylvia's taunts from before echoed in her mind. But no matter what, she couldn't risk exposing her goal in front of her target. Her refusal to explain only fueled the fire. Reborn, unwilling to let it slide, sneered as he questioned whether she had some kind of inferiority complex, drilling into her the obvious gap between nobles and commoners. As if to rub salt in the wound, Sylvia was asked to speak next. Calm and composed, she downplayed the situation, claiming responsibility for accidentally destroying Ephraim's work and brushing the whole ordeal off as a misunderstanding. In an instant, she had positioned herself as the innocent party, making Ephraim's actions appear even more irrational. The professors wasted no time grilling her further, throwing accusations of anger issues her way. Reborn, taking it a step further, outright suggested expelling her. There was no point in keeping a student who lacked the composure to follow basic discipline. Alienated and alone, Ephraim sat in silence. Not a single word of support came her way. To the professors, she was already guilty. Every insult, every harsh reprimand was aimed solely at her. And the worst part? She couldn't even fight back. With her father gone, there was no one left in the world to stand by her side. She could only sit there, helpless, as the weight of their judgment bore down on her. In her frustration, her gaze shifted toward Deculein. Somewhere in her heart, she pinned part of the blame on him. Not that it changed anything. At last, Adeline spoke, noting how the professors seemed to be in unanimous agreement. But before she could conclude the meeting, she turned to Deculein, asking for his opinion on the matter. That was when everything took an unexpected turn. Ephraim braced herself, fully expecting him to deliver the final blow that would seal her fate. Expulsion seemed inevitable. But to her absolute shock, Deculein turned the tables on Sylvia. His voice cut through the room as he pointed out that Sylvia wasn't blameless in the incident. The statement alone stunned both students into silence. Without hesitation, he pressed further, questioning why Sylvia, with all her so-called prestigious abilities, had done nothing to prevent the fight. Surely someone from the esteemed AAA household could have handled such a situation with ease. So why had she let it escalate? Sylvia, caught completely off guard, lowered her head in shame. After a moment of hesitation, she confessed the truth. She had deliberately refused to block Ephraim's attack, hoping that the girl would land herself in trouble. The silver-haired noble looked like she was having a mental breakdown, unable to believe that Deculein, the very man she saw as an enemy, had just offended Ephraim. It made no sense. Why would he go out of his way to protect her? Reborn, unwilling to let the argument slide, fired back, stating that Sylvia was still the victim. Regardless of her role, the blame fell solely on Ephraim. But Deculein wasn't done yet. With his usual cold, unshaken demeanor, he countered that the real failure here was his own. If his lectures were so unimportant that they could be conducted without his presence, then perhaps he should take responsibility instead. That statement left Reborn completely flustered, the old fart scrambling to come up with a rebuttal. Meanwhile, Ephraim sat there, struggling to process the absurdity of the situation. Deculein had just steamrolled another professor, all to protect her. It was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And yet, it was happening right in front of her eyes. Having heard enough, Adeline made her decision. She saw no reason to treat this as a grave offense. Students naturally clashed at times. It was only normal at their age. With that, she dismissed the meeting, declaring that no punishment would be issued. Ephraim and Sylvia were free to leave. As she walked out, Ephraim felt nothing but confusion. She had mentally prepared herself for expulsion. Knowing Deculein, this was supposed to be her downfall. And yet, here she was, walking away unscathed. None of it made sense. Not one damn bit. After the meeting, Reelin couldn't help but applaud Deculein's sharp insight and analysis, impressed by the way he dissected situations. But our boy's attention was elsewhere. His gaze shifted to Ephraim, who had called for him. There was hesitation in her eyes, but she mustered the resolve to ask the question burning in her mind. She had been holding on to this for a long time, wondering if he recognized the name Luna. Did he even remember? Her father, the man Deculein had put through living hell, the one who had suffered so much under him that he ended his own life just to escape the pain. The weight of that memory sat heavy on her chest. And yet, Deculein, being the master of anticipation that he was, had expected this moment. He knew she would reach out to him eventually. Ephraim, determined to get her answer, studied him closely. Would he twist the verdict of the meeting just to protect himself? Would he dodge the question? Or worse, what if he didn't even remember mistreating her father? That thought alone made her stomach churn. If he had truly forgotten, that would make everything even more unbearable. But Deculein's response took her by surprise. Without a hint of hesitation, he told her that dwelling on the past would only hinder her growth, that she shouldn't burden herself with old wounds. And just like that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ephraim standing there, stunned. Yet in that moment, something clicked. He had to know about her father, because if he didn't, he wouldn't have gone out of his way to help her. Did he feel guilty? Was this his way of making amends? She couldn't tell. But if his help was some form of pity, then fine. That was enough for her. At the very least, the scumbag professor hadn't completely erased his sins from memory. And as long as that was the case, she could live with it. With that, the conclusion of Ephraim's case was settled, resulting in an unexpected addition of 2 points to Deculein's death prevention score.